All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Today I'm on with Russ Thornton. Russ, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to dive right in. I love to ask the question of, for somebody who does not know you, how do you typically introduce yourself and explain, the problem that you solve out there in the marketplace?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Reade. I've been looking forward to this conversation. As far as how I introduce myself, I tell folks that I help women plan for and successfully transition into retirement. I've been doing this a long time. That's evolved over the years, but that's my current focus and has been for the last 10 plus years.
I like it. And so obviously that was an intentional choice that you made to pick that particular niche within the space. And for folks who are watching this, have seen some episodes, have know a little bit about me, you know that I've got a pretty deep background in financial services as well. And I know that it can be difficult to differentiate yourself from other advisors, wealth managers, those in that space. So can you walk me through the thinking and the process of determining to focus on that particular niche?
Sure. It was actually, I guess, kind of two or three things that have happened over my career. So when I was coming out of college, this is way back in the early 90s, and getting started as a financial advisor, my mom and dad went through what turned out to be a pretty nasty divorce. And my mom got a lot of assets, alimony, and child support from my two younger brothers who were still at home. Fast forward to today, she's in her late 70s and she's got Social Security and a little bit of a pension that she got from my dad during the divorce, and that's about it. She actually had to declare bankruptcy a few years ago. I'll circle back to that in a minute, but you'll see how it's relevant. And over my 30 plus years as a financial advisor, I found a couple of things. I found that I enjoy working with people, which is what I most enjoy about the work I do, but I really enjoy working with women because in my experience, and I'm painting with a pretty broad brush here, women generally are more interested in how they can use their money to live a great life as opposed to just trying to get the best return or, focusing exclusively on the money. And I also kind of found it to be a natural market. As I progressed in my career, I was getting introduced to more women that were widowed, divorced, or that weren't really being included in the relationship with their husband and the advisor, and they were just looking for a change. And so kind of developing that natural market, if you will, combined with my personal experience with my mom, and what should have been a very different outcome, but hasn't been, and my two brothers and I continue to have to, deal with that to this day. And we love her and we're happy to do it. But all those things kind of conspired to lead me to where I am today. I decided about a little over 10 years ago to kind of embrace this and say, hey, this is who I enjoy working with. I have a personal story here that not only can I tie into this work, but is also a strong motivator. And when I have the opportunity to tell that story to women and other potential clients, in a lot of cases, it really resonates with them because they begin to understand not just who I am and who I help, but why I'm interested in helping them.
Well, I think that's good. I mean, it's smart from a business perspective to choose a niche, but it's so much more meaningful when there's a personal story and attachment to it. And I think meaningful both in the way that the public receives that information, but also for you, right? To give you that, there's the cheesy way of saying this, right? The finding your why. But I think there's a lot to that, right? Of giving yourself a reason to get out of bed in the morning and be excited to go to work and serve your clients, right? Because there's a lot of days where, it's really challenging, right? And as an advisor, I mean, you're very much an entrepreneur in all but business title, whether you own the business or whether you're a whatever, if you're working through a larger firm, but you own your book of business in a lot of ways, right? And you own your reputation and you own your brand. And so to be really, to be able to be proud of that and the work that you're doing, it makes all the difference. So I commend you on that. And so with that said, I mean, are there different ways that you go about working with clients, given that you work typically and primarily with women?
Not really. This has clearly evolved over the years. I don't want to give anybody the indication, the idea that I had this all figured out from the start. I mean, I've gone down some dead ends. I've had to turn around and kind of refocus on kind of where I want to go and how I want to get there. But today, I don't work exclusively with women. That's kind of how I put myself out there into the marketplace. As you mentioned earlier, I use that as a differentiating factor when an advisor is maybe talking to, when a client's maybe talking to another advisor or two or three. But I don't work exclusively with women. So if it's a happily married couple, I'm happy to work with them as long as the woman is and wants to be engaged in the relationship. Over the years, I've had couples where the husband kind of says, "This is my domain. We can kind of read my wife in, but this is kind of what I enjoy. She's not really interested." And I get that, but I don't think it's an area of life where a woman can afford to be not interested, if you will. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't really have a different service offering or business model for one client versus another. I've toyed with and kind of explored that in the past, but I've kind of settled in on just keeping things simple and really focusing on serving my clients the best way I can, whether it's a woman that's on her own for whatever reason, or it's a couple that I'm working with.
Got it. No, that's good to know. Yeah, and so I'm then curious, the process for creating new client relationships, right? So you have done something not a lot of financial advisors do, which is you very intentionally built a brand. You've chosen a niche. I mentioned those things. How do you then make sure to, we'll say, properly promote yourself within those circles? Is there an intentional, content strategy or an outreach strategy or just a networking strategy that you use to kind of grow those circles?
Yeah, there is. And today, I'd say a good 85% plus of new client opportunities come from word of mouth, referrals, introductions, and I'm fine with that. The other, 15, maybe 20% comes from my content marketing efforts. So I'm somewhat active on LinkedIn. In the past, I've tried all the platforms, everything from Pinterest to Facebook to Twitter. I've kind of settled in on LinkedIn for better or worse. And so I post on there, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. A lot of those posts are pointing back to my weekly email newsletter. So I've got a email newsletter set up on Substack. I post there every Wednesday morning. I've done it for quite a while. I've got, I think I have over 400 newsletter issues on there that I've kind of just accumulated over time. And so I've tried to be really consistent with that. And in doing so, I try to speak to kind of my ideal client persona, who is a woman, and I try to speak to her needs, her concerns, her fears, her anxieties, not at the exclusion of everyone else, but I just try to be very clear in that focus. And so when I write a weekly email newsletter on Substack, I also cross-post it to LinkedIn in addition to some other posts here and there. I've had clients, eventual clients, tell me that they've been reading my emails for months, or in some cases well over a year, before they ultimately reached out. So I kind of think of it almost as a very long-term nurturing sequence, if you will, for those that opt in and subscribe. And it gives people an easy way to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'd be interested in talking a little bit further about this, that, or the other." So I always include a fairly clear but somewhat soft CTA, call to action, in every email that says, "Hey, I'm available if you want to talk. Jump on my schedule. Happy to just have a no cost, no obligation conversation." And sometimes that leads to opportunities.
I think that's really interesting, and it's super encouraging, honestly, to hear that you've had success with and that you've been committed to such a long-term content strategy, which I would imagine probably took quite a while to really start to have an impact. because I know this, when you're talking about stuff, especially through, you're using Substack, which is a great platform. You're definitely active on LinkedIn and you're doing a really good job there. That it's not like you put some stuff out and people just start flooding your inbox with, hey, can I be your customer? Right? It's not that simple. Did you start with a strategy or a plan in mind for that, or did you just kind of see the winds of change happening and saying, I guess I got to start doing this content thing? What was the process kind of from the beginning when it comes to that?
So it was really a process of elimination. Maybe even call it a little bit of laziness on my part. Like I started with Merrill Lynch fresh out of college. So for the first several years, I cold called and interrupted people during dinner, trying to talk to them about a Georgia municipal bond to see if they'd, be willing to let me drive across town and meet with them. I knew early on I didn't want to do any more of that. I didn't really want to do events, seminars, workshops, chicken dinner kind of marketing. I do enjoy writing. I've tinkered with YouTube and some other formats, but I've really settled on and kind of embraced the idea of writing. And I'm no expert here. I'm figuring it out as I go along. But my understanding of kind of content marketing is being consistent is important. So people can A, get to know you, but B, kind of almost build an expectation that they're going to hear from you on a regular basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly or weekly in my case. And so kind of deciding what I didn't want to do first, kind of narrowed down my choices, and I kind of landed on, email marketing via a weekly email newsletter. Over the years, I've used MailChimp and ConvertKit and other platforms. I'm on Substack right now. It's worked well. It's easy. And I also do a little content marketing on my website, but over the recent past, I've kind of migrated and focused exclusively on emails. And you're right. It's not like you write 2 emails and, your calendar starts getting filled up. And the other thing that's, I think, challenging is to be able to connect the dots. I mean, I've been writing for a while, but if someone picks up the phone tomorrow and calls me or schedules a meeting on my calendar, and they say, "Oh yeah, I've been reading your emails for a while." Well, that's not like I can say, "Well, tell me which specific email triggered you to get on my calendar today," and they probably can't tell me if I even asked them that. So it's very kind of difficult to connect the dots to say I did this action that led to this outcome. I just kind of believe that it's accumulated effort. It kind of helps build my social profile. It makes me more discoverable online. And I'm convinced that even in the event when someone refers me to one of their friends, their family or their coworkers, the first thing they do is probably not pick up the phone and call me or get on my calendar. They probably go to Google or, Chat GPT these days and ask who is Russ and what's he all about. And I've tried to put a lot of content out there to make it easier for people to get to know not just who I am as a person, but how I think about and communicate ideas around financial advice.
No, that's really smart, and you make a really good point that is as quantifiable as content marketing is theoretically. It's not always easy to quantify the actual impact that a piece of content has on on a sale, for just to put it in super plain terms. I talk a lot. You use the term accumulative effect, and I often will talk about like the compound effect of content. When you've got years of content to your name that is easily findable by those who may become or may influence someone else to become a client, you create this like web that you can capture people in, and all of them may actually contribute. Sometimes the fact that you have that web of content, even if they don't necessarily dive deep into the material, it's enough of a credibility booster for somebody. Let's say, for example, they're really on the fence, or they've someone's told them about you, just going and seeing that, hey, look at all this track record that Russ has, established of really knowing his stuff. I'm going to be more comfortable talking to him about actually doing business together. In another way of putting it, if I'm thinking about referring you to a friend of mine, I feel more confident in doing so because when I point them to your website or to some of your content, it makes me look better in the eyes of the person that I'm referring, that I'm referring, because
Yeah.
you look credible, you look professional. And so it's like those are the little things that are hard to quantify that actually may end up making most of the impact on the marketing strategy, on the sales outcomes, if you will. So I appreciate you talking about it from the perspective of somebody that's actually done it and has seen the impact, because it's really difficult to explain that if you haven't experienced it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think there are a lot of related benefits, and I'm sure I've benefited from some of those, even if maybe I didn't recognize it at the time. The only other thing I'll add is as the SEC and the regulatory bodies have gotten a little bit more, have warmed up to the idea over the last couple of years of financial advisors using online reviews, I've started to do more of that too. So that's another kind of social proof or credibility booster that I have that's also kind of, I think, pairs well with the writing and the other things I'm trying to do online. I think that also probably helps with referrals and introductions as well. So I would say that's probably the final piece. But I would say if I had to sum it up in one marketing or business development effort, it really revolves around kind of my weekly emails.
That's great. And not to make this all about content, but I am curious, do you have a process for writing? Do you start with, video or anything like that? I mean, what's your process look like?
I guess I have a process, but it's not much of a process, if that makes sense. I used to use Evernote. Now I use some different tools,
Yeah.
but I literally capture ideas as they come to me. And sometimes that's, at 7 in the morning when I'm out walking. Sometimes it's, late at night as I'm kind of getting ready for bed. Like I'll just have an idea about something, or a client will email me and ask me a question. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a great idea for me to talk about, because if this woman asked this question, there's probably other women that have the same question. So I've got this laundry list of ideas that I've collected and continue to add to that I can never get to in my lifetime. So that helps, because when I go to write something, it's not like I'm just staring at a blinking cursor, trying to figure out what the hell am I going to talk about this week. So I've got a bank of ideas, and as far as actually writing, I've tried, but like doing outlines or mind maps just doesn't work for me. So I just start writing. So I write, and then maybe I'll write a first draft, and then I'll walk away from it, let it sit for a day or two. I'll come back, edit it. I use I use an online app called Hemingway.
Yep.
I'll drop my content in there. I always shoot for a reading level of like 5th or 6th grade or lower.
Yep.
Because I want to keep it simple and straightforward and not, try to sound smarter than I am. And so that's really the process. I mean, I write, I'll drop it into Hemingway. If they say, this is at a 11th grade reading level, I'll try to work to simplify it a little bit more. I usually try to shoot for, 600 to 800 words. Sometimes I get more verbose, and next thing I know, I'm at a 1,200 word article. I don't really sweat that too much, but that's kind of the method to the madness, if there is such. I've thought long and hard about, should I be more structured or have a more kind of stepwise process to go about this. But at the end of the day, I just want to share my thoughts and get it out on a consistent basis. And I don't want to let the process get in the way of actually doing the work.
No, I'm right there with you. And number one, I'll commend you on your app stack there, your tech stack there. I'm still an Evernote user. I think I have had my Evernote account since like 2012. which
Oh,
is
wow.
nuts. I don't use it as much because there are other tools that I think are a little bit better at certain things. But I do use Hemingway every day. I love that platform, and folks, if you're not familiar with that, I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. But you can paste whatever text you're writing into Hemingway, and it will give you what's called the Flesh Kincaid reading score, and it's just the reading grade level that you're writing, where your writing is, right? So if it's an 8th grade reading level, it'll show you that, and then it'll highlight text that is maybe more difficult to read, and that if you adjust that, you can bring down the reading grade level. What is so difficult for me to explain, especially to a lot of our clients who we're creating content for, is that the lower that reading grade level, the more effective that piece of content is going to be. It can feel a little insulting to say that, no, this is written at too high a reading level and it's at 9th grade. But it's because the average person speaks and reads at, maybe they read at a higher level, but what's comfortable for them to read at is at about a 6th grade reading level. And that's okay. We're not here to improve the literacy rate or whatever reading comprehension of our audience. We're here to impact them with our words that we put on screen. And so that's the job of marketing, especially in content, from a content perspective. So use that tool. Try to get it as low as you possibly can. If you can get under a 6th grade reading level and still communicate effectively, you're a rock star. And so I highly recommend that tool, and I appreciate you bringing that up so that we can talk about that on here. So, okay, so I like the process. I like that it's clearly working. You call it a non-process or a, an anti-process, but it's clearly effective, right? Because it's driving new business for you. You said something like 400 articles, which is several years worth of pieces that you've been publishing consistently on a weekly basis. That's fantastic. And then the email marketing piece is great. So last thing I'm curious about, and this is an issue with a lot of folks in the financial services space and some other industries too, is the compliance issue. Do you have a good relationship with the compliance department so that you can get this stuff, put through and approved on a speedy enough basis for it to actually get published on time?
Thankfully, I do. Otherwise, I would have probably given up, beating my head against the wall long ago. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, Reade, talking about the entrepreneurial nature of my role as a financial advisor and a lot of people in financial services. And I think and act very much in that manner, but I work for inside of a much larger organization. So I do have a compliance layer within my organization. Thankfully, they've been super, super flexible and give me a pretty long leash to do my writing or to even try other stuff. So if I want to try a YouTube video or something like that, they've been very accommodating. Clearly, common sense is involved. You can't go out and start using words like guarantee and, just overcommitting to anything that might come back to bite you. But, I've developed, I think, over time, a relationship with my compliance folks. So I still run everything by them for obvious reasons. They have to approve it before I can put it out for public consumption. But I think at this point, they know and understand that I'm, talking in very broad concepts. Much of what I write about is not about investing. It's more about lifestyle, financial planning, behavioral psychology type issues. So there's, I would say, less surface area for compliance problems with those topics. So that probably helps. But yeah, if I had a less accommodating compliance function, then I don't know that I would have been able to or willing to stick with it as long as I have or as consistently as I've been able to. So and it's clearly an important part of the whole marketing and content production element to anybody's business.
Yeah, I probably get this question 90% of the time I speak at, because we are still part of a lot of, organizations in the financial services industry, right? And at least 90% of the time I'm speaking or I'm presenting at an event like that, the question I know I'm going to get is, what about compliance? And part of me is, thinks that there's a little bit of a boogeyman uh, phenomenon here with compliance that, I just assume that we're not going to be able to say anything we want to say because compliance is going to shut it down. And in my experience, if you are too encumbered by compliance, one of two issues is happening. Number one, you are not actually creating relatable, relevant content, right? Because if there are too many red flags from compliance, that means you are talking at too deep a level, if that makes sense, right? You're not actually talking about the common issues that your clients and potential clients are facing, which are, and like I've, when I look at yours, right? I mean, rebalance your investments, refocus your life. You wrote that a couple weeks ago. What you're talking about there is relating, you're relating a person's financial life back to what's actually important, which is the peace of mind that they have in their day-to-day life, right? Which is way more important than any facts or figures that you can throw in there about the market or about returns or about, this or that. You're focused on helping them to enjoy their life and live their life with less stress. That's ultimately what you're trying to do. And I will die on this hill that nobody actually cares what you have to sell. All they care about is if you can help make my pain go away, whatever that is, right?
Amen.
If that pain is, I'm really worried about what I'm going to do in the future, whether it's retirement or as I'm aging or with my business, if there's, a succession plan that needs to be done, whatever the case may be, I care about that. If you can make me feel comfortable that you can help that pain, that frustration, that fear go away, then I'll work with you. I don't care what the product is. I don't care what the thing is that you're trying to sell me. If you can convince me of that, I'll buy it, whatever it is. Especially if the pain is big enough, right? If the pain is big enough, then the price can go up, and we're not selling something in terms of like, widgets where we can put a unit price to it. But you get my point there. Hopefully the audience, you guys understand what I'm saying there. But anyway, I think that that's something that can be very effectively communicated via a consistent content strategy. I think you've obviously done that well, and you've done a good job of working through the compliance challenges, which again, if you're smart about the content you're creating, it shouldn't be as big of a challenge. But I digress. I think that the important thing to focus on here, and as we're coming up on time, I want to be sensitive of your time, is that other people that are in maybe not the same industry, but similar industries where what they sell is highly intangible in nature. What would you recommend to them that they do if content marketing is something they've heard about or that they've listened to you now and they think, hey, I should give this a try? What would you advise them to do?
A couple things. I think first is start with a very specific person. You can call this a niche market if you want. I don't really care, but you cannot write or communicate effectively to more than one person at a time. So pick a person. That could be your favorite relative, a favorite client, whatever, and really get a very clear picture of who they are, how they think, and what's important to them. And when I say what's important, then I'm not just talking, as Reade was mentioning a minute ago, I'm not just talking about like, is my portfolio up or down? Like, you want to think in terms of like not just demographics, but psychographics, like what are their fears, their concerns, what are their anxieties? Because I agree completely with what you were saying earlier, Reade, and people are, I mean, at our base level, we're all very selfish animals. We care about ourselves, our lives. And so I want to know that you, whoever you are, can help me solve my problems and make my life easier. And so I think first, decide who that person is and get to know if you don't already know them well, get to know who they are. Like ask them questions or ask their friends and similar people questions, and write about if you want to write. I guess that's the second thing is decide what you like doing. If you like talking, then maybe a podcast or video is a better format than writing. If you enjoy writing, then you've got all kinds of outlets, whether it's emails or blog posts or social media or all the above. And so don't fight your personal preferences. If you like writing, but you are convinced that YouTube is the only way for you to market and grow your business, it's never going to feel natural, and that's probably going to be an obstacle for you to do it consistently and to do it well. And then the final thing is I would encourage you to be a little bit vulnerable and share who you are through whatever content marketing platform or vehicle you're using. So I'm not saying don't be professional, but mix in a healthy dose of personal and share about personal stories or share about your family or some of your challenging decisions you faced and how you got through them. Because people don't hire companies, they hire people. And so I think the more you can come through as a person that's relatable, that yes, is a professional and has expertise and has experience, but ultimately as a person and hopefully a likable person, that's going to go a long way, I think, to help in your content marketing efforts over time.
No, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I am finding myself encouraging that. I mean, just until I'm blue in the face, right? That people want to know who they are going to be working with, especially in a hyper relationship driven industry and profession like the one that you're in, which is, I mean, there may not be a more personal relationship they have with a service provider, right? Maybe outside of their doctor, maybe outside of their attorney, it's their financial advisor. You probably, when you look at somebody's, spending and their financial situation, you're going to learn more about them than in almost any other relationship. And so the comfort level that you need to establish in order to build that trusting relationship it's a really high bar that you've got to reach. And so we have this wall up that we've got to make everything so professional, and we've got to generalize things so much so that we don't, we're not, we're hedging all of our opinions, and we're not wanting to, alienate anybody. Not that we should alienate anybody, but to your point, by focusing on like that one person, imagine if you were writing a letter to one person, how would you communicate it to them? And how would you want them to, or what information would you want them to gain from this? It actually has the ability to impact many more people than if you make something just so vague and generalized and overly professional that it doesn't resonate with anyone. So I think that's great advice. I want to end this on a way for you to talk a little bit more about how people can get in touch with you, how they can work with you, and maybe even some parting recommendations. Given we're here at the beginning of Q4 in 2025, so we're moving into the new year before we know it. What are some recommendations that you would have to somebody who's watching this who feels like, what, I think I'd like to work with somebody like Russ? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, well, as far as finding me, as I mentioned earlier, I've tried to make myself pretty findable online, but the best place to start is wealthcareforwomen.com. That's my website. That links to my email newsletter, and you can kind of find my other online real estate from there. Advice for someone that's maybe considering hiring a financial advisor, whether that's me or someone else, is I think that even if you get a referral from someone that you know and trust, is continue to be very skeptical and wary. I find all too often that people are just, they're not willing to put in the work to or invest the time to find the right person to help them. They, I think, are all too comfortable to just take a referral and kind of run with it. And hopefully, if you received a referral in this example, it's from somebody that has your best interest at heart, and that will work out fine. But I think I've had dozens of conversations just over the last few years where people said, "Well, yeah, I thought I was going to get this and I got that," or I thought I was going to get this and I didn't get that at all. So it's very important to make sure that your expectations align with the reality of whoever you're going to be working with, and you need to be willing to ask the tough, maybe uncomfortable questions to make sure that there are not any there's not anything that you haven't explored and reached satisfaction with before you make a decision on whether you're going to hire me or another advisor or decide to do it on your own. So I would just be very willing to put in some time, talk to at least 2 or 3 advisors, maybe more, because financial services is largely a sales industry. It's kind of been that way historically. That's, I think, slowly starting to change. But a lot of advisors, and I would probably include myself, are pretty good at selling what we do. And so they're going to put their best foot forward. Again, just be a little bit wary, be a little bit cautious, a little bit skeptical. Talk to 2 or 3 advisors, and you might find that you loved the first woman or the first guy you spoke to, but you might find the next person is really going to be the best fit for you. So I could go on at length, but I would say just as kind of a pretty broad recommendation that I would recommend to everyone is to invest the time and energy, ask the questions, because hopefully this is a decision you make one more time and you don't have to make it again. So you need to really find that person that you feel comfortable with and that you feel is going to put your interests first and foremost.
So I completely agree. And y'all having spoken to and having really gotten to know, I mean, at this point, it's dozens at least, but probably, well into the, 100+ different advisors. Like, I mean, on a personal level, right? Having these conversations and understanding how their business is built. One theme that I can say is really consistent across that is that fit matters probably more than any other single factor. Right now, of course, that assumes that the person you're working with is highly professional and knows what they're doing and has the experience and stuff. But and I'm sure you found this before, you've probably had client relationships that for nobody's fault, just wasn't a great fit. Right. And so if you are watching this and you've maybe already got an advisor, or you've got, a guy who's, sold you a policy, and so now that's your advisor, right? Don't be afraid to have some conversations with some other people. Reach out to Russ, and I'm sure you'd be open to this as well. I don't want to invite a lot of, free use of your time, right? But just having the conversation, seeing if it makes sense to reevaluate your financial plan. That'd be my recommendation, having been in the space for a really long time. Russ, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I am definitely going to make sure that everybody is able to find you a little bit better because of what we've said here. And everybody who's watching this, if you're watching on YouTube, I ask you to please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Helps us to do even more of this. But Russ, thanks again for being a part, and everybody who's watching, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Reade. This has been a lot of fun.